I-Team reporter Melanie Woodrow joins me now to dig into this case, which you've been covering from day one, Melanie. So what does all of that we learned in your story in this week in court, what does it mean for the case?
Sure. So let's talk about this preliminary hearing. This is pretty much procedural in nature. You can think of a preliminary hearing almost as a mini trial or a mini case, if you will. Sort of, right? So the district attorney's office basically called several witnesses over the course of 2 days, mostly San Francisco police officers, and then also some individuals who had been processing the crime scene and analyzing some of that evidence, basically trying to put on that they had enough evidence to say, okay, Nima Momeni, the person who was arrested, he is the correct person that should be facing this murder charge. And basically, a judge agreed with that, right? So now it moves on to the trial that'll happen at some later date to be determined.
Okay, so there will be a trial. Momeni faces a murder charge. How about Momeni's defense? What can we expect from them? Because I know you've talked to the lawyers extensively.
Yeah, I mean, good question. So one of the questions I have and some of our viewers might have as well is, will this defense team stay the same? We've already seen one shakeup here in this case.
Right.
Previously, Nima Momeni was represented by an attorney named Paula Canny. They parted ways. Paula Canny had said there was a conflict of interest, and she said by law she could not say what that was. So to this day, we have no idea what that conflict of interest was. The question being, of course, based on how things played out over the last couple of days, will he decide to stay with this defense team? And it is a team, Karina. Let me tell you, there's a handful of attorneys, several of them who are traveling from the East Coast to be part of this team. And then, of course, you see the district attorney, and it's just one person prosecuting this case. So he's got a bunch of people. Momeni's defense team basically tells me that they were using the preliminary hearing as a way to gather information. They really wanted to see what kind of case the district attorney's office has, and they also wanted to put up some refutes to that evidence and kind of see how that played out. And some of those refutes, some of those theories that were floated out there included that Momeni and Bob Lee were good friends, that there was no motive here. There was no reason that Momeni would have stabbed and killed Bob Lee. They also argued quite a bit about the murder weapon, the knife. There was a lot of talk about that knife. We know that there was DNA from Momeni on the handle of the knife and DNA from Bob Lee on the blade of the knife, which is fairly compelling, if you will, as to maybe whose hand was on that, handle and then what happened to that blade. That being said, his defense team tried to argue that even though the same brand of knife was found in Momeni's sister's apartment, that was a coincidence. They said it was a fairly common brand, and also that the knives hadn't been part of a set. They were, it's not like one knife was missing from a butcher block or a set of knives. And they also talked about the DNA evidence, and they said, well, people are shedding DNA all the time, right? We cough, we talk. We're always constantly sort of shedding was the word, bits of DNA. And so they were arguing, well, that doesn't really necessarily say anything. They also talked about, his defense team, the fact that he was on surveillance camera in a well-lit area. And they suggested that if somebody were going to stab and kill somebody, why would they drive to a well-lit area as opposed to someplace more remote? Treasure Island was the example they kept using in their defense and their arguments. And why would somebody throw a murder weapon, a knife, so close by to the crime scene? We know that it was found at a Caltrans parking lot, pretty much right there where this incident happened.
Right.
And in response to that, the district attorney said, hey, look, I don't have to prove that he was a smart murderer. He may have been a murderer. It doesn't necessarily mean that he was a smart one. And so that was some of the back and forth that we heard between Momeni's defense team and prosecutors.
So they threw a lot out there, to kind of put in doubts, put holes in some of the investigation. How about the possibility of a deal being struck to a lesser charge? Could that happen?
Yeah, we got a little glimpse of this yesterday on day 2 of the preliminary hearing, because after floating all of these theories and making all of these arguments to the judge, at the very last moment, his defense attorney says, how about this? How about, Judge, you find not on this murder charge, but you find on a manslaughter charge? And he was arguing that perhaps this had been, the phrase in California is imperfect self-defense, or that it had been a heat of the moment, sudden quarrel, or heat of passion is the phrasing there. The judge did not go for that. But what was really interesting was, after suggesting that the judge find on this lesser charge of manslaughter for the case to proceed, then the defense team comes outside into the hallway. They talk to reporters and they say, hey, you know what? We're not deal lawyers. We're not deal attorneys. We're trial attorneys. We're not cutting a deal. We were floating that theory in there during the preliminary hearing, but our defense strategy for this trial will be totally different, and we're not going to tell you what it is. You'll have to wait and see.
Okay, real quick, we have about a minute left. Momeni's sister, was she there? I didn't see her in the video.
She was not in court. Of course, we've seen her previously. We've seen some video of her because she's been at other appearances and hearings, and she's sort of at the center of this to some degree, but she was not there over the last 2 days. We did learn more about what her role in all of this may be. There was witness testimony that said on the night of this incident that she had been using drugs and partying at another individual's apartment. That individual was named, and it was sort of suggested that Nima Momeni's issue was not with Bob Lee and any sort of relationship or inappropriateness he may have had with Nima's sister, but rather that it was this other guy that was named Jeremy Boyven, who was having a party at his place, that maybe his angst or, feelings of strong feelings of anger, if he had any, were directed towards that person. So we got a little bit more about what her role in this may have been, and that she had sort of called her brother to come and rescue her that night. But again, she wasn't there. We didn't see her this time.
Okay, and we know that there's going to be another appearance August 15th from Momeni. You, of course, are going to be covering this, but the actual case, it might take a couple months at least.
Trial date to be determined. I asked his defense team, when do you think? And they said, your guess is as good as ours, right? Okay. They have no idea.
All right. Well, I know you'll stay on top of it. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit more about this very prominent case.